Welcome to Chill Thoughts. The Chill Thoughts videos follow the teardown and build for each case that I cover. They contain my thoughts on the design of each case and the experience building in them. Maybe in the future you'll see some more conventional reviews, but for now, my ramblings will have to do. It seems like Thermaltake threw out some of the good lessons learned from the Tower 100, 200, and 500 cases when they designed the Tower 600. Let me elaborate. The Tower 100 had a screw-down top that slowed down access to the internals because it locked the side plates in, but it had a removable latching grate that made it easy to access the top ports. The Tower 200 and 500 did away with the screws, making internal access easier, but kept the grate. This was the best solution and solved two of the problems with the tower design pretty well. The Tower 600, and probably the Tower 300 too, I haven't checked that one, only has the snap-down top. So to get into the ports, you need to yank at that rather than simply press down on the edge of a grate to release it. It's not a great way to access routinely needed ports. Actually, the first time I pulled up on the top of this case, I slightly bent one of the audio ports, and I'm generally pretty careful. No lasting damage was done, it just pushed back into place, but that makes me nervous about durability for anyone that may be less careful or any accidents that may happen. But it's not just the case lid that makes accessing the rear I/O and the video card ports annoying. The fan bracket just below the lid nearly completely blocks access and even forces uncomfortable bends in the video cables. The bracket is removable to gain access, but you have to unplug the fans to move it out of the way, or at least balance it precariously on the edge of the case while you're plugging in your peripherals. And even then, you still have to put it back when you're done accessing the ports, so it's a hassle. On the older cases, sure, you might not have been able to put as many fans or as large of fans, but the fan location at the top was offset from the I/O, and there was no interference. The solution Thermaltake chose for top fan mounting in this case was an unforced error in my opinion. Sticking with 120mm fans, or even a single fan, to avoid all of these inconveniences would not have done much to hurt thermals in this case, if it even hurt them at all. I'll be testing how much of a difference moving the fan somewhere else makes later in this video, so watch for that. You could argue that this is just one area of the case, and it's not that big of a deal. After all, the rest of the case is great in general, and I have a hard time finding fault with any of that, but this is an area of the case that you have to interact with if you constantly use your computer and plug things in and whatnot. The top exit for cables already creates challenges for keeping your desk looking clean, and it eats a good bit of cable length up too. This just adds another level of frustration, at least if you leave the Tower 600 in its stock configuration. A friend recently built his PC in the Tower 300, which has a similar design, and right away was sending me text messages about what kind of, like right angle video cable would work well, or if I had any of them around. I don't think a case can be considered complete if it makes you immediately feel like you need to buy parts to make it work, even if there are alternative configurations. The build process wasn't very taxing. The only significant frustration came from installing the AIO, which barely qualifies as fitting in the Tower 600. I had to offset the radiator, so I couldn't use all of the short screws to mount it. Luckily, those screws came in handy later, and I was glad to have spares around. See, while I was building, I had to remove two of the bottom fan's screws to allow the power supply to fit. That's how tight the clearance was. The fan screws, like the heads, were interfering with sliding in the power supply. I knew at the time that this was going to be an issue for that fan. See, anchoring a fan to the radiator from just one side was going to be asking for some airflow issues, some pressure issues, and even some vibration issues that could all cause noise. And that all proved to be true when I tested the system later. We'll get to that, and I did solve at least part of that problem. If you go with an AIO in this case, I recommend a normal thickness radiator, maybe even a 360mm one or smaller. I don't like the lowest fan being choked, and it's best to avoid clearance issues. Let's get to some thermal tests. Without any fans added, the thermals were very good. Running the Furmark GPU and CPU stress tests simultaneously, the CPU stayed above 5 GHz on all cores the whole time, and the GPU didn't throttle either. This is a solid result after 10 minutes of running the tests, which I normally do just to make sure we reach some level of steady state temperature. Adding a fan to the bottom didn't actually help thermals very much, though I kept that knock to a fan at only about 30%, or roughly 1,000 RPMs, because it was incredibly loud at any higher speeds. During the stress test though, when the AIO fans had spun up, I was hearing an annoying hum from the PC. Stopping the bottom AIO fan killed that hum, and I believe it was caused by those factors I mentioned earlier. The two top fans did not produce the same noise when they were the only fans spinning. You may have seen complaints about Arctic fans producing a hum at certain speeds, and I thought that may have contributed, but I don't think that was it, at least not entirely. Luckily, like I said before, since I didn't use all of those short screws to mount the AIO, I used two to lock down that bottom fan. It was a bit tricky to get the screws in, and I had to use a very thin screwdriver that put the screws in danger of being stripped, but it worked okay. On retesting, I found that the hum was still present, but quite a bit dampened, so it's a partial win. A few days later, I went back and tested the system again with the top fans moved to the bottom and mounted as shown. It was the most sensible way I could install them to draw in air and kind of the only place they fit well. Removing that top bracket and moving the fans to the bottom didn't hurt thermals in my configuration. The CPU still stayed above 5 GHz, just barely, and everything just behaved pretty much the same, so I'd call that also a win. Even if you consider the complaints I made about the top I/O access to be reasonable and sensible, you still can conclude that this case is pretty dang good. You can build a really nice looking PC in here, and it looks good from a lot of angles. The footprint is somewhat small, or at least shallow, and the angular design makes it easy to view from either side of your desk. Most conventional ATX towers completely fail at that. So, I mean, this is a great way to display your fancy looking PC parts. This is another case that people can be very happy with if they buy it. It's definitely a look that only Thermaltake seems to be attempting and refining, so if you use it, your system will have a bit more uniqueness to it. I just wish that Thermaltake had not regressed so much with the top design. If you're willing to work around that, this could be your next build. Thanks for watching. I've got a bit of a throwback ITX case lined up next, so I hope you'll come back and watch those videos.